These ancient Roman weapons changed the course of warfare forever. The Roman Empire built a civilization that still amazes the imagination today. But its power was based not only on ingenious engineering or law, but also on a perfect military machine. The legions of Rome were a force to be reckoned with by all the peoples of the ancient world. Their success was based not on individual heroism, but on strict discipline, tactics, and of course, weaponry. These were not just tools for combat, but carefully designed systems, each of which served a unique purpose on the battlefield. They changed the approach to warfare forever. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple piece of iron thrown at the right moment could decide the outcome of an entire battle, and why a legionnaire's most effective weapon was also his main defense. What if I told you that the main secret to the Roman legion's invincibility was only 50 centimeters long? I'm talking about the gladius, or Spanish sword, which the Romans borrowed and perfected. This short stabbing and slashing sword became a true symbol of the legionary. Imagine a modern special forces unit where each fighter is armed not with a powerful sniper rifle for spectacular long-range shots, but with a compact melee weapon optimized for teamwork. The gladius was just such a weapon. It rejected individual heroism in favor of collective efficiency. If you fought against the Roman legion with your longsword, designed for wide, sweeping strikes, you would find that you simply did not have enough room to maneuver, while the legionnaire's short blades methodically struck from behind an impenetrable wall of shields. Unlike the long swords of the barbarians, designed for sweeping, slashing blows, the gladius was created for a different kind of warfare. It was ideal for close formation, for fighting in a wall of shields. A legionnaire did not need much space to deliver a quick and accurate thrust. Its design was ingenious in its simplicity. The wide leaf-shaped blade with a long tip was equally good for stabbing and for slashing if the formation broke down. It was perfectly balanced, and the small hilt with a massive pommel provided a secure grip. The length of the gladius, 45-60 centimeters, was the result of careful calculations and combat experience. In dense formations, where the distance between warriors was less than a meter, a long sword became a hindrance. The gladius, on the other hand, allowed strikes to be delivered in the space between one's own shield and that of a neighbor, using a minimum range of motion. The geometry of the blade was optimized for penetration. The wide part of the blade provided rigidity when stabbing, the long tip allowed it to pierce armor, and the sharp edges made it possible to deliver cutting blows when necessary. The weight of the sword, about 1 to 1.2 kg, provided a balance between lightness for quick strikes and sufficient mass for effective damage. The philosophy behind this weapon was efficiency and economy of movement. While a barbarian swung his longsword, a legionnaire could deliver several short, precise thrusts from behind his shield. It was a war of attrition, and the gladius was the perfect tool for it. The psychological effect of such a weapon was enormous. An opponent accustomed to one-on-one combat was confronted with an impersonal and methodical wall, behind which deadly blades appeared and disappeared. This broke the will to resist. Roman combat tactics were based on the principle of economy of effort. Legionnaires did not waste energy on wide swings, but used short, precise movements of the wrist and forearm. This allowed them to maintain high combat activity for a long time. While barbarians tired after a few minutes of intense, sweeping blows, legionnaires could fight for hours. Stabbing blows were not only energy efficient, but also more lethal. Medical studies of ancient wounds show that stab wounds had a significantly higher mortality rate than chop wounds. A gladius aimed at an enemy's stomach or chest inflicted wounds from which few survived. The gladius was not a weapon for dueling, but a weapon for soldiers. It did not require masterful fencing skills, but rather discipline and the ability to work in a team. It was this combination of simple but effective weapons and strict tactics that made the legions invincible. The production of such swords was streamlined. Standardization made it possible to arm huge armies with weapons of the same quality. Every legionnaire was as confident in his sword as he was in himself. Training in the use of the gladius focused not on individual technique, but on coordination with comrades. Recruits trained to strike in formation, learned to maintain the rhythm of attacks, and synchronize their movements with their shields. It was a choreography of death, where each performed their part in a deadly ballet. The metallurgy of Roman gladiuses reached a high level. The blades were made of high-carbon steel using a method of repeated forging, which ensured an optimal combination of blade hardness and flexibility. Quality control was strict. A defective weapon could cost a soldier his life. The gladius was carried on the right side so that it could be easily drawn without hitting the large shield held in the left hand. This was another detail designed for maximum effectiveness in battle. Every little thing mattered. Thus, the gladius is not just a sword. It is the embodiment of the entire Roman military doctrine: discipline, efficiency, and the superiority of the system over the individual. A short blade that helped conquer a vast world. The placement of the scabbard on the right was an innovative solution. Traditionally, swords were carried on the left, but this created problems with the large scutum. Carrying it on the right required a special technique for drawing the sword. The legionnaire had to grab the hilt across his body, which initially seemed awkward, but after training became a natural movement. Each piece of equipment was designed to work within the system. The gladius, scutum, pilum, and armor all worked as a single complex, with each part complementing the other. The sword was not a separate weapon, but part of the integrated combat platform that was the legionnaire. What do you think is more important in battle? Personal fencing skills or strict discipline and standard weaponry? Are you ready to learn the truth about how an ordinary leather-covered board became the most effective mobile fortress in history? The scutum, a large rectangular or oval shield, was no less important than the gladius. In fact, it was the scutum that allowed the gladius to be so effective. Imagine a modern police riot shield, but 3 times larger and capable of stopping not only thrown objects, but also arrows, spears, and sword blows. The scutum was just that, a personal shelter that the legionnaire carried with him, turning each soldier into a mobile bunker. If you attacked a Roman legion, you would not face individual warriors, but a moving wall of wood, leather, and metal, behind which deadly blades were hidden. Its design was a true engineering masterpiece. It consisted of several layers of thin wooden plates glued together at different angles, like modern plywood. This made it both lightweight and incredibly strong. On the outside, the scutum was covered with thick leather or felt and reinforced with metal around the edges. This protected it from cutting blows and prevented the wood from splitting. In the center of the shield was an umbo, a large metal hemisphere. The multi-layer construction technology was revolutionary for its time. 3 layers of thin wooden slats, usually made of poplar or willow, were glued together so that the fibers of each layer ran perpendicular to the previous one. This created a structure that could absorb blows in all directions, distributing the energy across the entire surface of the shield. The leather covering not only protected the wood from moisture and damage, but also added an extra layer of protection. Thick oxhide could stop arrows and felt cushioned blows. Metal edging prevented the edges from splitting when striking the ground or other shields. The umbo served several functions at once. It protected the legionnaire's arm holding the shield and served as an additional weapon. A powerful blow with the umbo could easily stun an enemy or break their bones, creating an opportunity for a gladius thrust. But the main strength of the scutum was its role in collective tactics. By closing their shields together, the legionaries created an impenetrable wall that protected them from arrows, spears, and stones. This wall was not static. It could move, press on the enemy, and be rearranged. The umbo was not just a defensive element, but also an active weapon in the Roman arsenal. A convex metal structure weighing about 1 kilogram, located at the level of the enemy's chest, turned into a battering ram when used correctly. Legionnaires trained to strike the enemy's jaw, solar plexus, or knees with the umbo, disorienting them before the final blow with the gladius. The collective use of scutums created an effect that exceeded the sum of their individual defensive properties. When the shields were closed together, they formed a continuous surface with no gaps through which arrows or spears could penetrate. The overlapping edges of adjacent shields provided additional protection for the most vulnerable areas. The pinnacle of the tactical use of the scutum was the famous tortoise, testudo. The legionaries in the front row held their shields in front of them, while those in the back rows held them above their heads. This created an armored box that was virtually invulnerable to projectiles during sieges. The scutum weighed about 10 kilograms, which was considerable. Carrying such a shield throughout the battle required tremendous endurance. However, the protection it provided was worth the effort. The testudo formation was a masterpiece of military engineering. The shields overlapped like roof tiles, creating a sloping surface that arrows and stones slid off without causing any damage. Inside this structure, legionnaires could safely advance toward enemy fortifications, carrying battering rams or ladders. 10 kilograms may not seem like much weight, but holding a shield in a combat position required constant tension in the muscles of the shoulder, forearm, and back. Legionnaires developed specific muscles that allowed them to hold the scutum for hours. Training included prolonged exercises with weighted shields to develop the necessary endurance. The shape of the shield was also well thought out. Its height allowed it to cover the body from the chin to the knees. The curved shape helped deflect blows, deflecting them to the side. Without the scutum, the legion's tactics would have been impossible. It was the foundation on which the entire defensive and offensive power of the Roman army was built. It was the soldier's home on the battlefield, his main protection and support. The cylindrical curvature of the scutum, radius about 60-70 centimeters, was not accidental. This shape allowed the shield to hug the legionnaire's body, providing maximum protection with minimum weight. The curved surface also deflected blows at an angle, reducing their impact on the shield bearer. What was it like to fight against such a moving wall, behind which a deadly blade could appear at any moment? But before the legionaries closed in on the enemy, weapons were used that decided the outcome of the battle from a distance. Are you ready to find out how the Romans deprived the enemy of their main advantage, the shield? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Roman armorers. This weapon did not look impressive, but its effect on the battlefield was devastating. The pilum, a heavy throwing spear, was designed for one purpose: to render the enemy's shield useless. Imagine a modern anti-tank weapon designed not to destroy the target, but to immobilize it. The pilum was just that. Its task was not to kill the enemy directly, but to deprive them of their protection and ability to fight effectively. If you were standing in the ranks of barbarian warriors under a hail of pilums, you would understand the horror of the situation. Your shield, your only protection against Roman swords, would become a useless burden seconds before hand-to-hand combat. The design of the pilum was unique. It consisted of a long wooden shaft to which an even longer thin metal rod with a small pyramidal tip was attached. The total length of the spear reached 2 meters. The main secret lay in the material of the metal rod. Only its tip was made of hardened steel. The rod itself was made of soft, unhardened iron. The engineering of the pilum demonstrates the Romans' deep understanding of materials science and ballistics. The wooden shaft, about 1 meter long, provided a comfortable grip and the right balance for throwing. The metal rod of the same length created a forward-shifted center of gravity, which increased the penetrating power of the strike. The combination of a hard tip and a soft shaft was an ingenious engineering solution. Hardened steel ensured penetration through wood, leather, and even light armor. But it was the soft iron of the shaft that transformed the pilum from a simple throwing spear into a tactical weapon with unique capabilities. Before the attack, the legionnaires fired a volley of pila from a distance of 20-30 meters. Thanks to its weight and design, the pilum had enormous penetrating power. It easily pierced any wooden shield. And then the most interesting part began. After hitting the shield, the long, soft shaft bent under the weight of the shaft. Because of this, it was almost impossible to pull the pilum out of the shield during battle. The physics of the pilum's operation were flawless. The weight of the shaft, about 2 kilograms, created a lever that generated torque when it hit the shield. The soft iron of the shaft deformed, taking on an S shape. Attempting to pull the bent metal shaft out of the wood required time and effort, which were not available in the heat of battle. A distance of 20-30 meters was the optimal compromise between accuracy and force of impact. At this distance, a trained legionnaire could throw the pilum with sufficient accuracy, while the spear retained the kinetic energy necessary to pierce the shield. The enemy warrior was faced with a choice. He could either throw away his shield, which had become a useless burden, or try to fight while dragging a 2-meter spear behind him. In either case, his defense was neutralized. If the pilum did not hit the shield but the warrior himself, its effect was no less significant. The narrow tip easily pierced armor, and the bent shaft prevented the weapon from being quickly removed. The psychological effect of a volley of pilums was devastating. Warriors who had just been standing confidently behind a wall of shields suddenly found themselves defenseless. Some tried to cut off the spears sticking out of the shields with their swords, but the soft iron was difficult to cut. Others threw down their shields, but this meant facing Roman gladiuses without any protection. A volley of several thousand pila thrown simultaneously completely destroyed the enemy's formation. The enemy army lost its main defense, the wall of shields, even before the hand-to-hand combat began. This gave the Romans a huge advantage. After the battle, the legionaries collected their pilums. The bent shafts were simply straightened, and the weapons were ready for use again. It was a simple, cheap, and incredibly effective technology. The synchronization of the volley was the result of strict discipline and training. Each legionary carried 2 pilums, one heavy for the first volley at maximum range, the second lighter for throwing before the immediate clash. The centurion's command coordinated the throws so that thousands of spears rained down on the enemy at the same time, leaving them no time to regroup. Restoring the pilums was part of the post-battle routine. Legionnaires used simple blacksmithing tools to straighten the shafts or heated them over fires to restore their shape. This cycle of reuse made the pilum a cost-effective weapon. The pilum is a striking example of the Roman approach to warfare. They did not simply create weapons, they created tactical solutions. It was a weapon designed not so much to destroy the enemy as to deprive them of their ability to defend themselves. Guess how long it took to clothe a single legionnaire in his famous armor? Lorica Segmentata, plate armor, is one of the most recognizable elements of the Roman army. It appeared during the heyday of the empire and became a symbol of its technological superiority. Imagine a modern bulletproof vest with ceramic plates, but made 2,000 years ago from iron and leather. Lorica Segmentata embodied the same principle, modular protection that could stop blows while maintaining the wearer's mobility. If you were a Roman armorer, you would understand the genius of the solution. Instead of solid armor, create a system of overlapping plates that work like scales, protecting vital organs but allowing the body to move freely. This armor consisted of several segments, horizontal strips of iron that were fastened together with leather straps and buckles. This design provided excellent protection for vital organs. Separate plates protected the shoulders. The main advantage of Lorica Segmentata over the earlier chainmail, Lorica Hamata, was better protection against stabbing and slashing blows. The metal plate distributed the energy of the blow over a larger area. This significantly reduced the risk of serious injury. The design consisted of approximately 30-40 separate iron plates, 0.5 mm thick, organized into 4 main sections: 2 chest plates, 2 back plates, and separate shoulder pads. The plates overlap like fish scales, creating multi-layered protection in the most vulnerable areas. A system of leather straps and bronze or iron buckles connected these sections into a single unit. The physics of protection were revolutionary. Unlike chainmail, where a spear strike could push the rings apart and penetrate inside, the hard plate of the Lorica Segmentata stopped the weapon completely. The energy of the blow was distributed over the entire area of the plate and transferred to adjacent segments, effectively dissipating the force of the impact. At the same time, the armor was surprisingly flexible. The segments could move relative to each other without restricting the legionnaire's movements. He could bend, turn, and raise his arms freely. Assembling and fitting the armor was quite a procedure. Legionnaires often needed the help of a comrade to tighten all the straps and buckles. This process took several minutes, but the result was worth it. The biomechanics of movement in the Lorica Segmentata were carefully thought out. The horizontal plates on the torso allowed the wearer to bend forward and backward, as well as twist to the sides. The shoulder pads were designed so as not to restrict the raising of the arms for throwing pila or striking with a sword. The total weight of the armor was 9 or 10 kilograms, which was lighter than full chainmail, 12-15 kilograms. The dressing procedure took 5 to 10 minutes and required the help of a comrade in arms. First, the rear section was put on, then the front, after which they were connected with side straps. The shoulder pads were attached last. This interdependence strengthened the combat brotherhood. Each legionnaire literally depended on his comrades to prepare for battle. However, this armor also had its drawbacks. The complex system of straps and buckles required constant maintenance and could break at the most inopportune moment. Repair in the field was difficult. In addition, the Lorica Segmentata was more expensive to produce than chainmail. It required more skilled blacksmiths and more time to manufacture. Therefore, it was never able to completely replace chainmail, especially in the auxiliary troops. Leather straps were vulnerable to moisture, rot, and mechanical damage. In the field, legionnaires had to constantly grease the straps, check the fastenings, and replace worn parts. Damage to a single strap could render an entire section of armor useless. The production of Lorica Segmentata required not only skilled blacksmiths, but also precise measurements for each legionnaire. Unlike chainmail, which was relatively universal, segmented armor required individual fitting for optimal protection and mobility. Nevertheless, this armor became standard in the legions during the heyday of the Empire. It provided the best balance of protection, mobility, and weight. A legionnaire in such armor, with a scutum and gladius, was a true fighting machine. The appearance of the legion, clad in segmented armor glistening in the sun, had a powerful psychological effect on the enemy. It was a demonstration of the order, wealth, and power of the Roman Empire. The army of barbarians in skins and simple clothing saw before them an indestructible wall of steel. The visual effect of thousands of identically equipped legionaries in gleaming armor was part of psychological warfare. The uniformity of their equipment demonstrated the organizational power of a state capable of arming tens of thousands of soldiers with identical, high-quality weapons. For tribal armies, where each warrior carried his own, often homemade equipment, it was a terrifying sight. But what happened when the enemy broke through the wall of shields and armor? In the next chapter, we will look at the weapon of last resort. Battles did not always go according to plan. In the chaos of combat, a legionnaire could lose his gladius or find himself in a situation where it was inconvenient to use a sword. It was for such moments that he had a weapon of last resort, the Pugio dagger. Imagine a modern soldier who carries not only his primary weapon, but also a backup pistol in case of an emergency. The Pugio served exactly this function for Roman legionaries. It was insurance for when all other weapons became useless. If you found yourself in Roman hand-to-hand combat, where the distance between you and your opponent is measured in centimeters, you would understand that a long sword becomes a hindrance, and a short dagger is the only way to survive. The Pugio was a wide, leaf-shaped dagger about 20-30 centimeters long. Its shape was ideal for delivering powerful stabbing blows at extremely close range. It easily pierced leather and even chainmail armor. It was usually carried on the left side, opposite the gladius. This allowed it to be quickly drawn with either hand. The dagger was not just a backup weapon, but an integral part of the equipment. The geometry of the Pugio blade was the result of many years of evolution. The wide blade, up to 5 to 7 centimeters at its widest point, provided the rigidity necessary to pierce armor, and the leaf-like shape created a wound that quickly expanded upon penetration. The central stiffening rib made the blade virtually unbendable when thrusting. Its placement on the left side was a strategic decision. The legionnaire's right hand held the gladius, and the left hand held the scutum. If the Pugio needed to be used in close combat, the legionnaire could grab it with his right hand without letting go of the shield with his left or vice versa. Take the dagger with his left hand while keeping the sword in his right. In the confines of a melee, when the enemy was literally hanging on the shield, the Pugio became the main weapon. A short strike from below or into a gap between the armor could decide the outcome of the fight. It was indispensable for finishing off a fallen enemy. In addition to its combat function, the Pugio also served as a universal tool in camp life. It could be used to cut food, cut rope, or sharpen tent pegs. It was a soldier's knife for all occasions. The Pugio fighting technique required special skills. Unlike the gladius, which was used in a relatively structured formation, the Pugio was used in chaotic melee combat, where there was no room for sweeping movements. Legionnaires trained to deliver short, precise strikes to vulnerable areas. Under the armpits, in the neck, between the ribs, and in the groin. The versatility of the Pugio made it an indispensable tool in everyday life. Archaeological finds show traces of these daggers being used for a variety of purposes, from cutting meat to working with wood. Many Pugio were sharpened on both edges of the blade, which increased their functionality. Many Pugio, especially those belonging to officers and centurions, were richly decorated. Their handles and sheaths were covered with silver, enamel, and engravings. Such a dagger was not only a weapon but also a symbol of its owner's status. Despite its auxiliary status, the Pugio was a formidable weapon. Its wide blade left wounds that were very difficult to heal. This made it effective even against opponents who were stronger. The decorative elements on the Pugio served not only aesthetic purposes. A richly decorated dagger demonstrated the rank of its owner and could be used for ceremonial purposes. Silver inlays often depicted military scenes, the names of owners, or dedications to the patron gods of the legion. The nature of wounds from the Pugio was particularly dangerous. The wide blade created wounds that bled profusely and often damaged internal organs. In the era before antibiotics, even a small wound from a contaminated weapon could lead to a fatal infection. The presence of such a weapon gave the legionary additional confidence. He knew that even if his main weapon was disabled, he would not be left unarmed. The Pugio was his last line of defense. It was precisely these well-thought-out details that made up the superiority of the Roman army. They thought not only about the general battle, but also about each individual soldier in the chaos of combat. The Pugio is a vivid confirmation of this. The psychology of having a backup weapon was an important factor in morale. Knowing that you had a fallback option allowed legionnaires to act more aggressively and decisively. This created a mentality of invulnerability. Roman soldiers were dangerous even when they appeared to be unarmed. Thus, this small dagger played an important role in the equipment and psychology of the legionnaire. It was a symbol that the Roman soldier was always ready for battle. Even in the most desperate situation, he still had one last argument. What if I showed you a time machine capable of firing a projectile 400 meters with incredible accuracy? The Roman army was not only strong in hand-to-hand combat, its engineering genius gave rise to artillery that terrified enemies, and the Scorpion was its most deadly representative. Imagine a modern sniper capable of hitting targets at distances unattainable by ordinary infantry. The Roman Scorpion performed a similar function on the battlefield of antiquity. It allowed key targets to be destroyed long before they could pose a threat. If you commanded a barbarian army and saw your best warriors falling one after another from invisible blows coming from the Roman ranks, you would understand the horror of your enemy's technological superiority. The Scorpion was in essence a large and powerful mounted crossbow. Its energy for firing was stored not in flexible arms, but in two bundles of tightly twisted sinews or hair. This torsion system allowed it to achieve incredible power. The Scorpion was mounted on a special tripod and operated by a crew of two. One aimed the weapon using complex mechanisms, while the other was responsible for tensioning the bowstring and loading. It was a highly accurate and complex piece of technology. The torsion system was a revolutionary engineering solution. Bundles of sinews, usually from cattle, or human hair, were twisted to extreme tension, creating enormous potential energy. When released, this energy was instantly transferred to the throwing arms, accelerating the projectile to speeds unattainable by conventional bows. The aiming mechanism included horizontal and vertical screw adjustments, allowing for accurate targeting at distances of up to 400 meters. This required knowledge of ballistics and the ability to calculate the flight path, taking into account wind and distance. The Scorpion fired heavy, bolt-like arrows with iron tips. These projectiles could pierce through a warrior's shield and armor at a distance of up to 100 meters. The maximum flight range reached 400 meters. The main advantage of the Scorpion was its accuracy. An experienced operator could hit a single target the size of a person at a considerable distance. This made it the ideal weapon for destroying enemy commanders, standard bearers, or siege engine operators. Scorpion bolts weighed about 200-400 grams and were 60-80 cm long. The pyramidal iron tips were designed for maximum penetration. They could pierce a wooden shield 2 to 3 cm thick and continue flying with enough energy to strike the warrior behind it. The tactics for using Scorpions were highly specialized. The crews were trained to identify priority targets. Enemy officers with distinctive insignia, musicians, commanders, and standard bearers, whose fall demoralized the troops. On the battlefield, a battery of several dozen Scorpions could wreak havoc. They took out the most important and dangerous opponents, causing chaos and panic in the enemy ranks. It was a powerful psychological weapon. Scorpions were also actively used in the defense and assault of fortifications. They were installed on walls and towers, from where they could fire with impunity at the attackers. During a siege, they suppressed the defenders on the walls, ensuring the approach of assault groups. Each legion had about 60 scorpions and 10 heavier ballistas at its disposal. This made the legion a self-sufficient combat unit capable of performing any task. The Roman army carried its artillery with it. A coordinated volley from a battery of scorpions created a zone of suppression where the enemy could not safely remain. The reloading speed, about a minute for an experienced crew, allowed for continuous fire on key areas of the battlefield. The logistics of the artillery required special carts for transport and maintenance crews. Each scorpion was accompanied by a supply of bolts, tools for repair, and replacement torsion beams. This system made the Roman army unique for its time. This weapon demonstrated the superiority of Roman science and engineering. While barbarian armies relied on strength and courage, the Romans used mathematics, physics, and mechanics. The scorpion was the embodiment of this rational approach to warfare. How did such a high-tech weapon change the psychology of combat on a battlefield dominated by hand-to-hand fighting? But victory was not always achieved with complex machines. In the next chapter, you will learn about a simple but devilishly effective device that crippled enemy cavalry. Not all Roman weapons were complex or required skill. Sometimes the simplest ideas proved to be the most effective. Tribulus, or Roman garlic, as it is also known, was a striking example of this approach. Simple, cheap, and incredibly effective. Imagine modern anti-personnel mines or spike strips for puncturing car tires. The Tribulus was the ancient equivalent of these devices, a primitive but ingeniously effective means of controlling territory. If you were commanding a cavalry attack against the Romans and found that the ground in front of you was littered with thousands of metal spikes, you would realize that your main advantage, the speed and power of a mounted charge, had turned into a deadly vulnerability. The Tribulus was a small metal device with 4 sharp spikes. It was designed so that no matter how it fell to the ground, one of the spikes would always point vertically upward. It was the perfect passive trap. The main target of this weapon was enemy cavalry. Horses galloping over such a spike suffered serious damage to their hooves. The rider either fell or remained on the wounded, uncontrollable animal, becoming an easy target. The geometry of the Tribulus was based on the principle of a tetrahedron, 4 equilateral triangles forming a pyramid. This shape ensured that regardless of the position of the device on the ground, 3 spikes formed a stable support, and the 4th always pointed upward. The spikes were 5 to 7 centimeters long, enough to penetrate a horse's hoof or a human foot. The mathematical elegance of this design was striking. The 4 spikes were positioned at an angle of 109.47 degrees to each other. This was the angle that ensured the stability of the tetrahedral shape. Roman blacksmiths did not know the exact degrees, but empirically found the optimal configuration that made the device self-orienting on any surface. The material for manufacturing was chosen based on a balance between strength and weight. Iron was hard enough not to bend when it hit a hoof, but also light enough to be easily transported in large quantities. Each Tribulus weighed about 50 to 100 grams, which allowed one legionnaire to carry several dozen pieces without significant load. The speed of a cavalry attack turned the Tribulus from a simple nuisance into a deadly danger. A horse galloping at a speed of 40-50 km/h transferred its entire weight, about 500 kilos, to one hoof at the moment of contact with the ground. This meant that the spike entered the hoof with enormous force, causing much more serious damage than when moving slowly. It was also an effective weapon against infantry, especially against warriors who did not have good footwear. The spike easily pierced soft sandals or moccasins. Even if it did not cause a serious wound, it forced the enemy to slow down and watch their feet, disrupting the formation and pace of the attack. The tactic was simple but deadly effective. Legions scattered Tribulus before battle on the flanks or in areas where a cavalry attack was expected. The density of the scattering was several pieces per square meter, enough to pose a real threat, but not so many as to be wasteful. The calculations of Roman tacticians showed that the optimal density was 3 to 5 tribuli per square meter. At a lower density, a horse could pass between them, and at a higher density, the expenditure of resources became inefficient. This density created a 70–80% probability of stepping on a spike when moving quickly, which made a cavalry attack extremely risky. The distribution system was well thought out. Special teams of legionnaires received bags of Tribulus and scattered them with wide throws, creating an uneven but dense coverage. This unevenness was intentional. It prevented the enemy from predicting a safe route. In some cases, the Romans used false minefields. They scattered a small number of Tribulus in prominent places, creating the impression of large-scale mining. The enemy, not knowing the true density of the coverage, avoided these areas, which gave the Romans a strategic advantage without significant resource costs. The production of tribuli did not require advanced technology. Any village blacksmith could make them in large quantities. This made them an affordable and widely available weapon. At night, when visibility was limited, tribulations became even more dangerous. Attackers could not see them in the dark and stepped on the spikes, creating noise and chaos that alerted the defenders to the attack. This made the camp's defenses virtually impenetrable. The production technology was simplified as much as possible for mass production. A blacksmith took an iron rod, heated it red hot, and cut it into 4 equal parts. Each part was sharpened at the end, then all 4 spikes were welded together in the center at right angles. An experienced blacksmith could produce 50–100 tribulus per day. Standardization of size and shape was important for efficiency. Roman military engineers developed precise specifications: spike length, sharpening angle, total weight. This ensured predictable effectiveness regardless of who made the devices or where. The simplicity of production meant that legions could manufacture thousands of tribulus devices directly in the field, using the simplest of field forges. The cost of a single device was negligible, but the effect of their mass use was enormous. The effectiveness of this simple device was so high that it has been used throughout history, right up to modern warfare. The principle of operation has remained unchanged. It is one of those timeless inventions that never go out of style. Historical examples of the use of tribulus can be traced back thousands of years. During World War II, similar devices were used to puncture car tires. Modern police use modified versions to stop vehicles. Even in the space program, NASA considered the concept of self-orienting spikes for various applications. The economics of war also played a role. A tribulus cost a few denarii to produce, but could disable a warhorse worth hundreds of denarii and an experienced rider whose training took years. It was an incredibly profitable exchange that Roman quartermasters understood and appreciated. We have examined 7 examples of Roman weaponry, each of which was not just a tool, but part of a unified, well-designed system. The Gladius, Scutum, Pilum, and other elements worked in synergy, turning each legionary into a universal soldier and the legion into an indestructible force. Roman weapons changed warfare, shifting the emphasis from individual skill to discipline, tactics, and engineering. This legacy shows that at the heart of any great victory lies not only courage, but also careful planning, technological superiority, and an understanding of the psychology of combat. The Romans created not just an army, but a true science of warfare, the principles of which are still studied today. What ancient weapons would you like to see covered in future issues? Perhaps you are interested in the armament of Greek hoplites or medieval knights? Suggest topics in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the military technologies of the past.